1 sec. Agenda window. There we go.
Okay, so we have the 3 pending approvals to complete out by the TOC, which I guess we can handle asynchronously.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if we just get one more, looks good to me somewhere in them. Although 2 of them have merged, but.
Okay.
Oh, I see. We're doing retroactive. I will have a look at the Gateway API one then, because I haven't weighed in there yet.
Yeah.
Sorry, I checked it and saw that it was merged and thought that meant I didn't need to do anything.
Yeah, that was my other concern. That's why I tried to, at least when I was making comments, that we still need somebody to do it. But yes, we probably should still at least have them in there.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just sort of, depending on what happens, they can get merged without having 4 people sign off on them, I guess. So
That's probably okay. But yes, they should probably come to TOC. Like all promotions are supposed to come to the TOC, right?
Right. Well, and we had said last month, right, that they should have 4 or more. So that was just what I was trying to.
Sorry, I missed the last month. Okay,
So
well,
yeah,
we can.
I'll just look at them again, and we can merge up the other one when it's ready.
Okay. Is Greg here?
Greg is here.
Hi, Greg.
Could one of you guys click that link there? It provides a pretty good summary of the issue that came up. It was so this is a user submitted issue. Basically, it kind of is related to default cluster selection in virtual service when a Kubernetes service only has 1 port. So you have this Kubernetes service defined at the top, 1 port, 8080, and the issue is, in terms of destination rules, if you want to define a port level policy for 8080, if you define a traffic policy with a port level settings and a traffic policy with non-port level settings, they both end up pointing to the same cluster generated object in Envoy. And so if you want to scroll down just a little bit more, basically when you define a virtual service and just rely on, say, routing to default destination service A, it points to this default outbound 8080 cluster. And since in this particular case, the destination rule is applying a port level consistent hash policy, which is applied at the route object, despite the fact that it's pointing to the right cluster, it's not pulling in the right consistent hash, which is applied to the route object. Easy fix is if they just add to their virtual service, we want it to go to this destination host and this destination port. But I guess in terms of how that selection process is working, I don't know. Myself and Rama, we feel like this is just a simple lookup failure, that you have a destination rule defined for this port, and the virtual service is doing some default port selection, and it should be picking up the settings for this destination rule. But Zhang Hu raised an issue that we're kind of, I don't know, patching leaks as they pop up on just kind of relying on this default port matching behavior. And so the discussion is, do we just keep going forward and patching these leaks like this as they come up? Or do we need to come out and say, like, in this particular case, for example, this port level policy should not apply for all default traffic to the mesh for that host. Did I explain that pretty well, or are there any questions? So if this consistent hash policy was stored at the cluster level in Envoy, it'd be fine because virtual service, generates the right cluster name and points to that one, and normally that would work out. But since consistent hash is something that's stored at the route object level in Envoy, it's not actually selecting the right policy to apply in that default port scenario. And so the discussion is, we have a destination rule with a port level policy, but since that destination rule, that service in Kubernetes only has one port, that port level policy is technically defining all traffic for that host in the mesh, even though it's technically just a port level policy rather than a top level traffic policy.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this class of issue before.
Yeah, so just looking, I guess, for confirmation where we just keep on trucking with, I don't know, the default behavior, or if we say enough is enough. I don't know. Unfortunately, Rama or Zhang-Hu weren't able to attend today, so it's just me.
Are there any tracking issues in Envoy for this? Right. I mean, we had a similar issue before with weighted traffic split. Right, where it was a feature of route instead of a feature of the cluster. Right, or we weren't able to use composite clusters to do it. I don't remember the state of conversations within the Envoy community about whether they wanted to move some of these, what are clearly load balancing features, out of route. So I don't know if you looked into that at all, Greg.
No, I didn't think to look for any open issues in Envoy. I guess it seemed more like a Istio issue, just in terms of how we're doing this default policy matching when a service only has one port behind the scenes.
Well, it's really that, our concept of cluster, right, which is service, which we decorate with policy with destination rule, right, requires an additional layer of mapping because Envoy puts some load balancing things into cluster and some into route.
Correct. I understand that.
And this is not the first time this has happened. I'm trying to remember. Weighted traffic split was certainly one of them. But there have been others, if I remember rightly.
So from a user perspective, if the user needs to use this feature, all they need to do is specify the port on the destination rule, right? That would work. What Rama is trying to say is, hey, can we simplify this? Because this is the only port, so they don't necessarily have to specify in the destination.
Yeah, there's two different solutions that work for this scenario. Yeah, Lynn, your audio was coming through a little choppy, but I think I got the gist of it. There's two solutions. One, in the virtual service, they specify the port, and then that way it tells Istio to select the correct port level traffic policy. The other option is, rather than defining this consistent hash load balancer for that specific port, just define it for top level. So those are two different solutions that do resolve it.
So Greg, then this is making the UX just better, where the service just has one port. You don't have to specify the virtual server's port level override, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So let's see. Yeah, so the destination role that's just at the top of the screen share right now. The question is, does this destination role define one cluster and Envoy with the default traffic policy settings, or does it also, or sorry, so the default and then also a port level 8080 traffic policy? Because in this case, they point to the same thing since there's only one port defined, so the default cluster is picking up the 8080 port level settings.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
I'm still a little like, I mean, for me, when the behaviors change magically, when a non-istio resource is changed like this, well, the user goes and add another service port, what will happen then? That's the thing I'm a little worried about.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that logic in clusterbuilder.go to see how the cluster name is selected in the case of multiple service ports rather than just one.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the Envoy API, there's two parts to the contract, right? They want to be able to vary the topic for hashing by route, but they also have a default, and then they specify the load balancer hashing type, right? Maglev or ring hash or one of those. But we do not as yet have the features that are in the hashing part of the routing API attached to the routing API, which it seems like we should be doing. Does that make sense to people?
So we do support specifying the algorithm, right? Or the load balancing algorithm in destination rule?
Yes, I think we even added maglev recently.
Exactly. So what's missing then is,
If you look the root action hash policy in the Envoy API.
route action hash policy. Is that the document you send on chat? That's not it, right?
That's the
Yeah.
LB. I'll send the other one.
I see. Okay, this makes sense.
But we don't mimic that in the virtual service API.
Uh-huh. So when we say use consistent hashing, what do we provide then?
Probably the default, which is host.
Oh, okay.
Although
No, it says we have an option for providing doing consistent hashing based on a specific header, cookie, source IP. So we do have all those options.
where are you seeing that?
We might not have it for everything.
Are you looking in destination rule, Niraj?
Yeah.
Right. I think what I'm saying is that's the wrong place, or that it's okay for that to be the default for the cluster.
Oh, I see. You want it also on a per matcher, which will be
on the route resource.
the route resource. Okay. Yeah, this makes sense at a higher level.
Right, but it doesn't look like it should be right. What's on destination rule should be promoted to the route. On the other hand, that kind of looks like what we did in the API.
Greg, one thing that would help me follow this issue, you've got a really clearly documented case to trigger the issue. It would be very interesting to see the relevant XDS that case generates today and what your proposed solution generates to kind of have an understanding of the change.
Okay. Yeah, basically the proposed change that Rama has in the PR, it's only impacting the RDS generated object.
Okay.
And it's adding new fields rather than modifying any existing, because the route object is still pointing to the same cluster name, but now it's properly applying the consistent hash settings that are defined for that port in the destination rule for that route, that host, sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, I can update it with the proper XDS and give you a ping.
Thank you.
And yeah, I guess Niraj also raised a good issue just in terms of how does that output differ when a service has two separate service ports.
You're looking at merging this into Istio master, so presumably we're not discussing scope for 116.
Correct. And so, yeah, it's a question of, is this a breaking change, or is it a continuing to support what the spec and our default behavior implies? And whether or not we change the default behavior by not doing this particular patch, and whether or not we need to call out, I don't know, that new behavior.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so my understanding is this is a convenience, right? Basically, we're saving the user from declare the port manually in 2 places when they only have 1 port. But the concern is that, what if they have multiple ports and one day they added another port, and then the behavior could be a little bit unpredictable.
Correct. That's a good point.
Yeah. Given destination rule is going away in Gamma, I'm not sure, this is such a critical change we need to entertain. That's just my thoughts at the moment.
I was waiting for John to weigh in with something Gamma related.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Like there's just so much ambiguity here. It's hard to know what's the right thing to do and what we should change and what we should just keep as existing semi-broken state. Gamma not having the same problem is a very nice thing to look forward to, but it's also, realistically a ways off for most users.
Right. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of concern about how to manage the port selection, right? I mean, we have precedent for most specific match wins, right? In a situation, without a more specific match, right? We just end up ordering the destination rules by age, effectively, right? Which is also confusing, but it's the best that we've done in these situations. So actually having port discrimination probably helps the user, not hinders them.
So I have 2 different concerns here. One is regarding the breaking or not breaking existing behavior. I think at this point, if some user is relying on a bug, probably we should preserve the bug and opt in or have a mechanism where the user can get the correct behavior with either a global option or destination, but we cannot afford to break any existing behavior if we believe some user may legitimately have used this. Second is also related to Gamma. Gamma doesn't have this, but probably will have to have it at some point. So destination rule or a variant of destination rule will probably exist in Gamma as a policy or part of the API eventually. So if we find a way to express this correctly, it would be a good idea to discuss it with Gamma and because they already discussed some service binding, or I don't remember how they are called, where they want to put some TLS settings. So they are moving in that direction to have some ways to customize. But I think the key is to find what exactly is the correct behavior and what we want to be long-term and we want to support. That was my comment.
Okay, so we have 2 problems, right? One, port selection. Custom, I'm not sure that we can't treat the port selection thing as a bug, given the existing ambiguity. It seems like the kind of thing we can document in release notes.
If we break some user, we have many managed products which automatically upgrade. Release notes are not something that we expect at this point in Istio to be users to be able to upgrade without having to read the release notes and having to make change. So that's really my criteria. If a user can do an upgrade to 1.17, 1.18, and they don't have to read release notes and start to make changes in their configs, then it's good. Otherwise, it's too risky because a lot of people rely on automatic upgrades and don't read release notes and have the expertise to do whatever is necessary.
Can we automatically patch customer resources where they've leveraged this ambiguous behavior to be non-ambiguous before performing the upgrade?
Did it ever work where, with ambiguous behavior or backward incompatible changes, we actually made this work? I mean, we tried 10 times so far and never succeeded.
So I mean,
I
we can.
I was just going to say, from my understanding on the original issue, this isn't like a customer did an Istio upgrade and they all of a sudden started seeing this change in behavior. This is somebody deploying a new Istio instance and just a general bug.
So if it requires user to do something to get a new behavior, then it's good. I have no problem with that. But if there is any change in behavior, because we don't know how they are using, what is relying on, I mean, it's getting very complicated to find out all the possible use cases. And
Eric?
what I was saying, second part about the gamma, and if we move to a new resource, for example, with the proper behavior, that will be a pretty simple migration. They will be encouraged to move to gamma. They will get the correct behavior if they use gamma. And if they keep using destination rule, no problem. I mean, they keep the old buggy behavior, but it's stable. That was my take. But I don't think this is such a, I don't know how it will break users. That's really my, I mean, if we are sure it will not break any change behavior, then it's probably okay.
Right. I mean, so today, if the customer had this set up in destination rule and they mutated one of the destination rules, and it doesn't really matter which one, the one that was not mutated will become the one that's selected. And if they go and edit the other one, it'll flip. Right? Because we select based on age, like last modified.
Well,
So-
last modified could be non-deterministic in a CI/CD system.
It can be non-deterministic, full stop. So I'm highly, I find it very, very unlikely that any customer is relying on any behavior in this situation where they have two destination rules for the same service. The fact that the port is not acting as a more selective selector, well, they just edit the one that doesn't have the port in it, and all of a sudden the one that does have the port in it applies to everything. So it sounds like we have a bug no matter what, Costin. And I'd be pretty shocked if anybody was depending on the current behavior.
But if we have more specific destination rule with workload selector, for example,
Then that would apply.
and the one with port in the namespace will not.
No, it's not like the selectors are orthogonal, right? They're a hierarchy.
So you apply with the workload selector without port, and you apply with port, but in a more generic in Istio system. Will the one with port in Istio system be ignored because you have a more specific destination with, or they are merged?
I have to go look at the code to see if the workload selector beats out the one without the workload selector.
Yeah, but if you have to look at the code, it's probably something that a lot of people will be confused and need problems.
Yeah, no. This has been the nature of destination rule for ever at this point.
I know. That's what I'm suggesting. Let's start, in Gamma, a new resource that does the right thing and it's, has proper attachment. We don't have this kind of confusing behavior. And encourage people to move to the new API. And we don't have necessarily to fix destination rule. We can just start with something simpler for Gamma.
Well, this was a bug report, right? Greg,
Yeah.
from a customer.
Correct. Yeah.
So I don't think we can completely ignore them.
As long as a
I
bug
mean-
report in a user is not a feature on another user, that's fine. But if we fix it and then another user reports that something broke because the whole behavior was what they were assuming, then they have a problem.
Well, I don't know if any user could be assuming the old behavior, right? Given the non-determinism.
Yeah, I kind of agree. In this case, probably it's too broken to preserve. Yeah.
That's the first problem. The second problem is what we is at odds with what Envoy does. And how do we want to resolve that going forward? Do we want to promote the hash action features onto virtual service? And maybe the answer there is no, and we wait for Gamma. people have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't quite know enough, sorry. At this point, I mean, it feels like that functionality will be useful, but I don't know what API is the right API to mutate.
Hmm.
This also has some implication on persist sessions and other features where I mean, it's a pretty generic problem where do we want properties to be associated to a route? I mean, /foo has a property and /bar have a different property even if they go to the same destination, or do we treat it as a property of the destination itself? And in Envoy, a lot of things are kind of treated as a property of the route. So foo and bar, if they both go to the same destination, they can have different properties. So probably we should look kind of at a bigger picture in this case.
And how would we resolve? The Envoy thing is pretty, attaching lots of stuff to the route, while very powerful, is also harder to configure, right? Like if I want to rely on the same header to hash, right, when I talk to this service, right, you could make an argument that what Envoy is doing in route is a little too complicated, maybe, and is maybe more a feature of their processing pipeline than the actual intended user behavior.
You see, anyone can disagree that Envoy is doing a lot of things more complicated than they should be, but at the same time, if we don't align with them, we'll make things very difficult to implement and to understand for our users because it's a mismatch, impedance mismatch between us and Envoy.
Mhm. If I
John,
look,
what do you think? Sorry,
Do we
what do you
have-
think? Sorry.
I was going to say, do we have like existing open issues on GitHub or feature or users asking for route level session persistence or route level persistence, however you want to it, session cookie header, whatever. So
Yes, I've been working on with some customers for gRPC. Actually, they want persistent sessions pretty badly. And I think there are a few customers who need it, and they actually asked for per route, but we cannot really do it because of different reasons.
okay, yeah, I mean, traditional ones I have not seen per route, but like the load balancers I've used normally, I'm sure Mitch will also say they don't support this, if I remember correctly. If Envoy supports it and users want it, I mean, there's no harm in exposing it. But I just haven't seen Istio issues around it.
right,
Yeah, I have a question. So should this be applied to the load balancer policy in the cluster configuration, or I think if it is applied to the load balancer policy in the cluster configuration, will this problem still occur, or?
yes. So this is applying to two things at once. One is the cluster, and the other, right? If you want to use a header as the key for a consistent hashing mechanism, the only way to specify that today in XDS is in RDS, not in CDS. CDS will let you specify a consistent hashing mechanism over a key on endpoint metadata labels. Not on properties of the traffic.
Okay, thanks.
At least
So
that's how I
Louis,
read the API right now.
then currently in Istio, the destination rule API translates to all the routes getting the same
Yes.
configuration. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a template.
Okay.
Now we could, I don't know, try and do some analysis of usage and say, well, the overwhelming majority of users, whenever they refer to the same cluster, they use the same hashing mechanism.
Yeah.
It would be pointless to do that analysis in Istio because we force it. And I don't know how to do that analysis for non-Istio
Yeah,
things.
but normally any feature of Envoy that Istio doesn't expose, we see it either being requested in GitHub issues or people have created complicated Envoy filters and then say, hey, can you promote this? Right.
Yes.
Maybe
But in
you
this
can-
case, we are offering the complex Envoy feature, at least to some degree. We're just offering it. We're offering it in a different API. So I guess, yeah, there's this question here. Is the assumption that Istio makes of applying the key selection mechanism to the cluster, has that proven
Is
to
that
be
a better?
has that proven to be insufficient to users? And I think the evidence, by lack of, although we should probably do a little bit more research, is no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Custom in the thing that you were doing, was that pattern insufficient, right? Of attaching the hashing key extraction to cluster, or logically to cluster, even if it's not physically attached in XDS. Was that insufficient for this?
Yeah, the customer was using Envoy filters and attaching to route, and they kind of expected it to work also per route with Istio, and that's not possible because most destination rules are. I mean, we had a long discussion in the API review, and
was that really true? Did they need it to vary per route significantly, or was it always going to be the same key for that cluster?
My take is that it should always be the same key per cluster, and you know, if the destination is a stateful set which or requires persistent sessions, it's very hard to imagine many cases where different if you use a different route you have different property. However, Envoy has a behavior and documentation and everything else and suggest that's the correct way to do. Customers read the documentation and believe that if Envoy say it, it's true, and we have to support it somehow.
No, we don't have to.
I know, but customer believe we have to.
There are many things that Envoy does that we don't, and you know, not including them has been fine.
Yeah, but that creates that creates tension and creates bugs and create all kind of complexity in our code. So that's really the problem.
I just searched on GitHub and Istio. Oh, I mean, if I search consistent hashing, there are just 13 issues, 12 of them closed, 1 open. Nothing much to talk about route level enablement.
How would this impact ambient? Is this something that only the waypoint proxy will support, presumably, and it's only for HTTP? And
yeah, I think that's true.
But
at least for key extraction from HTTP, right? Consistent hash based on other attributes of traffic would work at L4 in theory.
Yes, actually, that's a very good point. We could have consistent hash with TCP to some extent.
Source port, right? Or
yeah. Well, all the metadata we put in the baggage. Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, but typically when you see maglev, right, it's used with source IP and or source port.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't think it matters to the API though.
At a TCP level, obviously it doesn't, right? You don't even have route level options there, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's actually the main point why per route is
Yeah.
not ideal.
Yeah, I've never, again, I mean, I know Onward does things in its own ways, but all the years of using load balancers, nobody has exposed this level of capability because I don't think it's useful.
Okay, so my inclination is to leave the API as it is, and in fact, absent evidence to the contrary, Dustin, not to try and promote these features to route, regardless of the route API. Like this is going to come up in Gamma too.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I'm just pointing that there is a tension. I mean, and we will pay a price. I'm not saying it's a right. I think the right solution is per cluster for sure. How we express it's a different story because in Gamma clusters associated with services, really more or less.
Right. So what's going to happen in Gamma is somebody's going to attach a policy resource to a service, declaring the load balancing properties, and that will include key extraction. And then that will be the default. And if then somebody wants to override it per route, right, then you can attach a policy resource to the route, which I think you can do in Gamma. But I think almost nobody would do that.
You know, I mean, there is no point if it's a service defines the property of load balancing, which is kind of the case in Kubernetes,
right?
To some extent. Why would you do it per route? Yeah.
So I think what we're doing is still fine from an API specification standpoint. So the only thing that remains is the selectivity. And I'm fine with fixing improving the precedence ordering for selection as a bug fix.
Yeah.
That seems like the least invasive change that satisfies the bug.
So without the ports, I would expect, let's just say we don't have any baggage. If people didn't specify ports in the destination route, in the traffic policy, I would expect that load balancer traffic policy would apply to all the ports.
Right.
For the service, would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to Neeraj, your point about if the user adds another port, then that port also gets this particular load balancer traffic policy. So it's consistent.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if the destination rule does not have port level overrides, then those policies should apply to all ports, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Okay, so I think we have consensus, which is you are allowed to go ahead and make a bug fix, Greg, and maybe take a look at the documentation in the destination rule. And if it's unclear how selectivity would work in the case where a port is specified, then that needs to be cleaned up.
One more, sorry for extending this discussion. What if we put the port in the host, you know, svc.cluster.local column port, which will kind of...
I think that will fail to parse.
Well, we can fix parse. I mean, that's a normal syntax for host headers, and that will be clearly opt-in. It's kind of a different destination rule for the port. It's more compact, easier to type, easier to understand. It also can apply. It's an opt-in effectively.
Right, but I think destination rule host is not actually a host selector custom. It's a destination selector, the same way that destination is a destination selector in virtual service.
Sure, but it's equivalent. I mean, functionality is equivalent. We put the port in the host name, or we put the port in port settings.
I think we've been trying to be very careful not to use the word. This is a legacy thing in destination rule. We don't actually want to use the word host because it confuses people when we talk about matching host headers versus selecting services.
That's why I was suggesting, because host header actually has that's the format of the host header. So if we use host
Yes,
header,
so-
that's
yeah,
really
so
what the user.
Yes. So it's not that, and it should probably be called destination.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah.
So we have 8 minutes left in this meeting. Can we resolve this issue in the next 8 minutes, or shall we take this offline and look at other?
I think we have resolved it, right? Which is we will fix the selection ordering to take port as a priority as a bug.
I'm sorry, Louis, can you repeat that?
So port is now part of the selection priority order.
I see.
So most specific port wins within 2 destination rules that have the same selectivity.
Yeah, and also if the no port is specified, they don't have to specify port. It would just apply to all ports, right?
Right, correct.
Yeah, if they do specify a port, and then that's the priority.
Yes. I think the only remaining question mark is within workload selection, right? Because destination rule has a workload selector. Right, if you have a more specific workload selector and a less specific workload selector, does port come before or after that in terms of selectivity?
I mean, these are applying at 2 different points. You got to pick one. That I would say you will put the workload first, I guess, because you're resolving this eventually at the client, right?
Right, so I think workload selector takes priority over port selection.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So the
Why have we
workload
made our
selector,
lives so much worse?
so the workload selector, that's on the destination workload or on the source workload here?
It is
Source.
on the source workload.
Okay.
That's why this API is confusing.
Yeah,
Because
very confusing.
all the other ones are always on the producer side. This is the
Destination,
only
yeah.
one on the consumer.
Yeah, because it's a consumer-based policy.
Mhm.
So first we select rule by age, then we select by port, then we select by
No,
namespace, then workload selectivity. Sorry, no, I had that the wrong way around.
no, you got that wrong.
Yeah, I did get it wrong. First we select by namespace, then we select by most selective workload selector, then by port.
Yes. Then by you had it the exact opposite. Then port, then age. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Is that the order? Namespace, workload, age, then port.
You switch the last 2.
Port, then age. Yeah. Okay. I think we've beaten that one to death.
Too complicated, yeah.
Okay, Mitch, upgrades, take it away.
Sure. This is very similar to previous presentations, so I doubt that it's going to take a ton of time for us. I'll go ahead and take over sharing, Francis. So this is our quarterly upgrade check-in that we've committed to from the User Experience Working Group. You all recall kind of our history that upgrades have been an issue in the product. We've had a number of hypotheses how to move them forward, and so we're watching these quarterly to see if any of those hypotheses are playing out. Oh, and by the way, all of this data comes courtesy of Google, so thank you to Google for extending the courtesy beyond my tenure with the company. And thank you to Martin Ostrowski for taking over ownership of these reports moving forward. He and I will work together on the presentations on a quarterly basis. This shows our average upgrade distance. 1 being such as like 114 to 115, 2 being like 113 to 115, and 3+ being more than that. We support 1 and 2. and it's great to see 2 becoming more prevalent. However, we're seeing a lot of 3+. Would love to talk to those users and get an idea if they understand that they're on an untested path and are happy taking on that risk themselves, or exactly what their reasoning is there. But that has become much more prevalent over the previous 12 months to do large upgrades. The good news about 3+ skip versions is that these users are getting up to date. And as we'll see, that's something not all of our users are doing. Also, this does show the raw number of cluster upgrades that we're seeing across the fleet. And you'll notice it does not have hockey stick growth. It is improving and getting higher, but it's not keeping up with the growth of the Istio project. And we can see that here. One thing to note, this is not a per cluster chart. This is a per resource chart. So data plane, whether it's in the sidecar or gateway, as well as instances of Istio-D. And since we're measuring all the way back to 1.4, we're also counting mixer, etc. in the mix. This is a data error. Don't worry about it. Something happened on the Google side to mess up our data collection for about a month there. We do see new versions getting picked up rather aggressively. Here's 1.14, has a nice uptick in utilization very recently. We do have this mysterious massive uptick in 1.4 utilization at the same time. We did track that down to an individual account who has since turned down their 1.4 instances. We're not exactly clear on why they did either of those, but they have, in fact, this decline here is a real decline. So we expect that to just have been a very large anomaly in the data set. We do see that 1.10 has some serious staying power in open source, that it's not really fading off. And of course, that's quite an old release at this point, so that is somewhat concerning. But we do have this nice adoption curve, which we're very happy with, to see that overall Istio utilization is increasing exponentially over time. This takes that exact same data, but arranges it around our end-of-life date. So 0 is the day that we end-of-lifed a given minor version release. On this chart, you can see, again, 1.10 has, it did drop off after end-of-life, but it has not continued to drop off. We had this spike right around the EOL date, and then just continued usage and even some growth in overall utilization of 1.10 up to about 1 year after end-of-life at this point. So 1.10 is a little bit concerning. However, we do see other releases that have a nice fade off. This blue line for, I think that's 1.12, shows that our utilization is decreasing, although often this end mark is due to a partial month worth of data, and so we can't trust the last data point. Overall, end of life is not a strong signal to Istio users that they should begin to migrate to another version. 1.11 continues to have its utilization grow well after end of life. So they're not responding to this. And by the way, this is only accounting for open source uses of Istio on GCP. This does not count Google Cloud's vendored and paid product, which obviously, because it's managed, would have a different curve. So if we aggregate this information to see how many of our users are currently on a supported minor version of Istio, we see that 72% are not. And that number is growing over time. Blue would be the users who are on a supported minor version. You can see a downtick every time that we end of life a version, and then it grows as users begin to upgrade to supported versions, and then another downtick. And you can clearly see that users' upgrades are not keeping up with the cadence of end of life. Progressively, we're seeing fewer and fewer users on a supported minor version. We've asked, oh yeah, Niraj. Oh, Niraj has to drop. Thanks, Niraj. We've asked users, or we've asked in the past how this compares to other open source products and not had great data on it, but the Datadog container report just came out. And on Kubernetes, they found that the vast majority, well over 50% of Kubernetes clusters are running v1.21, which is recently end of life. I think it's 4 months out of date. 18 months old. They provide 14 months of support, so this v1.22 at that time was just about to go out of support. So we are not alone by a long shot. in having a vast number of users on an unsupported minor version. We actually are more or less on pace with Kubernetes. I don't know if that's something to boast about or something to be disappointed about, but
Are we on pace with, or actually better than?
if we consider that, so I don't actually have the data from the report. All I have is this infographic, which does make it a little bit difficult to draw conclusions. But assuming that these numbers add up to about 20% that we're on a supported minor version, we would be outperforming Kubernetes by about 10%.
Yeah, that was kind of how I. Probably because we're slightly less disruptive to upgrade than Kubernetes, which is saying something.
Yeah, that would be a great conclusion there. It's not clear if Datadog's report includes managed Kubernetes instances, which often are supported well beyond the open source end of life, or not.
It does. It includes any Kubernetes cluster where Datadog is used as the telemetry solution, regardless of vendor.
Okay, so it's possible that in the Kubernetes case, you have users on older versions because they are supported by the vendor. I think GKE supports back to V120 at the moment, for instance. If we look at the same data based on vulnerability rather than based on minor version, 97% of Istio users are running a version, or Istio components in GKE are on a version that is vulnerable to various CVEs. We can see that at each CVE release, that number drops or rises to 100%, and then users begin to patch over time. We do see that the most that we ever have patched in the last 2 years is less than 20% patched against all known CVEs. Some of our users are aware of their CVE status and just don't feel that they're exercising the features where the vulnerabilities exist. Others are not aware of that status. Others are aware and are vulnerable, but simply don't feel that they have the time to upgrade. Let's see, I know we're at the top of the hour, so I'll make this brief. We asked our users in surveys how easy it was to upgrade to each of these versions. And this charts the data, 5 being easier than previous releases, 1 being much harder than previous releases. Overall, we do see a trend that releases are getting easier and easier to upgrade to. I also have introduced this new dimension to the data. These lighter zones at the top are not actually upgrades. They're fresh installs of Istio. So we can see that fresh installs are actually heavily biased towards users stating that it's very easy to install and onboard onto Istio, which fits with our anecdotal experience. However, that does show that the highest approval ratings are actually around installs and not necessarily around upgrades. We also ask our users what mechanism they use to upgrade, whether it's in place or revision based. We have this is across all 3 upgrade surveys that we're covering right here. We have 33 responses. 11 of 33, or about 1 in 3, prefer revision-based upgrades. The reasons that they gave, they didn't give many reasons, actually. This is the only 2 responses that we got to. Why do you prefer this particular upgrade mechanism? 18 out of the 33 said that they prefer in place. And the reasons tend to hinge around simplicity and ease of operation. If users get around to upgrading Istio at all, they don't have a long period of time over which to do the upgrade. And they don't have a long period of time over which to study and design their upgrade. So they tend to express a preference for in-place upgrades as simpler. As a project, we've called out that these are, while simpler, these are in fact substantially more risky for users, but that doesn't seem to dissuade our users from pursuing them. I see no benefits, for instance, of revision-based upgrades because ingress gateways are still upgraded in place. That's something that we have experimented with in our Flux integration with CI/CD support for non-in-place upgrades of gateways for more progressive rollouts there, but not a lot of uptake in the community yet because it adds complexity. And if we then take this data around mechanism and reverse apply it to upgrade satisfaction, we can see that our users are most satisfied with in-place upgrades. We just don't have a ton of users who don't know what upgrade mechanism they're using and who also rated their satisfaction. And slightly less positive trend, but still in the positive direction, on revision-based upgrade satisfaction. So concluding thoughts, it's clear that we've still got a ways to go, but there is some positive news there in terms of upgrade satisfaction. We did have several users call out in the comments better CI/CD documentation on how to upgrade Istio using CI/CD. That's an area that we've already begun to invest in the user experience working group, but I do hope to see that investment grow over the coming year and gain additional visibility for our users. Any questions?
Just my usual comment. I think it's a 10th time I make it. Maybe we should listen to users that, they don't enjoy upgrading every 3 months and, increase time between releases and have fewer releases with longer support. So we do what the customers want, not try to make them do what we want. That's my.
Costin, are you referring to the 3 times a year release versus the 4?
Yeah. So basically, it seems that a lot of users, they would prefer looking at this graphic to have maybe 1 release a year or 2 releases a year, but fewer releases, so they don't have to do this every time.
So I'm aware that was brought up before, but I wasn't aware why didn't we adopt that plan?
I don't know if it probably didn't have enough data or other reasons. I don't know.
We did change our support windows about a little over a year ago now to expand by 6 weeks the support to support skip version upgrades from say 1.12 to 1.14 over a 6-week window. Unfortunately, what we saw with that change was that effectively users, let's see, here it is, that was right around here. We saw that an unprecedented number of users were on a supported minor version, but users effectively just moved their behavior back by 6 weeks as a result of that policy change. I would not be opposed to experimenting with a policy change again. For instance, picking one of our releases to be LTS and seeing what that does to user behavior over the coming years, over the coming year. But I would want to do it on a somewhat experimental or contingent basis after we saw user behavior change in the wrong direction with our last change.
I don't know how we could do it. Declaring a version LTS and saying we support it for a year would require a bit of investment. So to have but for the user perspective, we can figure out if a lot of people start to stick with that version for a year, that will probably be a success sign, not a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, Mitch, are we done with your topic?
Yeah, my topic is done. Costin, I think that's an interesting point. Since we're so far over and I think we've lost most people, probably would be good to maybe bring that up at the next TOC meeting.
Yeah, I agree, because that's something dear to my heart as well. I have a 30-second question, hopefully less. So for OSS Istio, has it always been a OSS project since the start? The context I'm working with CNCF folks to migrate it to the new CLA, the CNCF CLA. And they're asking that question. Sorry. Google Legal is asking.
You have seniority here. Was there ever a point that this was not open source?
I don't remember. I don't think it ever was non-open source.
What do we know?
The license, have the history in Git. We can look at Git history. First version was open source with Apache license. So the code that is Istio always from the beginning had Apache license. It was in a repository Apache license.
That seems likely to me as well.
Okay, thank you.
Because that's a policy in Google. There is a process to release stuff on GitHub, and assuming people who put the code there didn't violate Google policies, it should have gone through the review and went directly to open source.
All right, and that is everything. Thanks for staying over, folks.